Hello there, and welcome to Lowering Costs and Raising Expectations in Calculus using Alta and OpenStax. My name is John Britch. I am a nerd at Knewton, and you've come into this webinar muted to preserve audio quality. But if you have any questions, please use the question field on your GoToWebinar utility bar to ask any questions, and we'll either answer them at the time you ask them if it's appropriate, or save it for the Q&A at the end of the session. So our session is 45 minutes, leaving some time for questions, and what we're really going to cover is, what is Alta? How is it so affordable? How does it work? Why is it a useful tool for calculus? And some best practices from someone who's actually using with OpenStax. So our facilitators helping us to answer those questions are Sharon North, Professor of Mathematics at St. Louis Community College, and Andrea Pellerito, a Senior Content Developer at Knewton. So right now we're going to jump right in. Sharon, could you tell us about yourself and your students?
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Sharon North. I am at St. Louis Community College, our Florissant Valley campus. I have been teaching here for 20 years. I teach mostly transfer level mathematics, so calculus, pre-calculus, statistics, quantitative reasoning, college algebra. And I've included here a picture of a group of my calculus students working at the board. They are mapping out some functions and approximating areas under the curve using left-hand, right-hand, and midpoint sums. So as they were working so hard that day, I thought I would snap a few shots. I've been using OpenStax since 2015 and Alta since 2017, so about a year and a half now with using Alta. Yeah, so here's a slide. I'll give you a little bit of information about my district and where I teach. Florissant Valley is part of a 4-campus system of St. Louis Community College. Each of our campuses has a Center for Excellence, and our Center of Excellence is our engineering program. So we teach, quite a bit of calculus. Our students typically transfer either to the Missouri University of Science and Technology in Rolla, Missouri, one of the finest public engineering schools in the country. Also into a joint engineering program, really a partnership between the University of Missouri St. Louis and Washington University here in St. Louis.
So let's ask the question. So why did you choose Alta, Sharon?
Sure. So as I said, I've been teaching with OpenStax text since 2015. I made the decision to go with, open educational resources, specifically OpenStax, because our students really struggle with finances. I remember one day I walked into a pre-calculus class and none of my students had a textbook. And so I walked over to the bookstore after that and took a look, and our pre-calc book was, $200, and our students just couldn't afford it. So that's when I started to look at open ed resources. And I do want to give a shout out to my colleagues at our Forest Park campus. They were really the kind of the leaders in our district and with using open ed resources. They've been using it for probably 6 years now. And so I needed really a courseware to go with the OpenStax and started looking at, the different OpenStax allies, and that's how I found Knewton and Alta. And what really attracted me to Alta was the adaptive nature of the platform, that when my students begin to struggle, They're presented with an instructional piece to kind of give them that content right when and where they need it. Also the videos that my students, can watch. And it really partners perfectly with the OpenStax. So yeah, I've been using really OpenStax texts in all of my courses, and I've moved to Alta in my courses now as well, all of my different sections. And something really I hadn't thought about at the time when I was choosing Alta is just how the analytics could inform my teaching. So I can now tell, who's struggling and what they're struggling with. I can tell who's active, who's getting close to mastery, who's inactive, and I can really use those analytics to inform what happens in the classroom. So that's been really a great asset to my classes as well.
Super. So Sharon will be joining us again later in the session to show us some of the analytics, the diagnostic that she uses and how she uses Alta with OpenStax. But right now, since there are a variety of courseware options and homework options, we just want to take some time right now to really look under the hood and define what exactly is Alta and how is it different from other courseware for calculus. So bring in Andrea Pellerito, and could you tell us a little about yourself and Alta Knewton?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been here at Knewton for about 7 months now. I'll get into a little bit about why I joined the company, but before I was here, I spent about 6 years working for a traditional publishing company where we published textbooks. There was an online component, of course. There was an adaptive system associated with it, and I worked on both the math and chemistry teams there. Chemistry in particular, because prior to that, I taught chemistry at Indiana University for about 8 years. I'm a chemist by training and spent a lot of time in the classroom and in the lecture hall. So it's been really interesting for me to bring that teaching perspective into product design, both at the previous company and at Knewton as well. Like I mentioned, I left that traditional publisher earlier this year and came over to Knewton. The big driving force behind that was to have a bigger impact on influencing the way that students learn, to build this adaptive platform, and to offer high quality, very low price options for students. We want to make sure that our content is accessible for all students. That's something that's particularly important to me as an educator, and traditional publishing company that I work for did not offer that in a way that I saw fit. So I'm happy to be over here at Knewton for more than half of a year now. I work on both chemistry and some of the math disciplines as well, but I've really enjoyed participating in research into teaching and learning for all of our disciplines, including calculus that we offer here at Knewton. A little bit about Knewton itself. And again, this is one of the things that particularly attracted me to the company, is that we want to make sure that we're offering the right kinds of resources for students, and we're doing that in a very personalized and adaptive way, meeting every single student exactly where they are in their learning path, regardless of how they got there. But we also want to make sure that we do that in a way that enables you, the instructor, to teach in whatever way you see fit. We don't want to take over your class by any means, but we want to be a really effective tool so that we can get all of your students up to speed to really empower you to do the things that you know are necessary for you to do in the classroom. So I think Alta allows us a unique way to be able to do that. Knewton itself has been around for about 10 years now, although the Alta platform was launched just about a year ago. Before we launched Alta, Knewton primarily focused on partnerships with traditional publishing companies. So they were often the adaptive engine behind a traditional homework system in a variety of different companies. We severed, for the most part, all of those ties, built a new platform, Alta, from the ground up. But the good news is that during that 9 or 10-year period, we were able to invest a lot of resources, interact with 15 million students in a variety of different courses and capacities, and really study the way that students interact with content, study the way that they learn, the learning paths that they go through before they're really confident and proficient in a particular topic. So during that 9 years before we launched Alta, we were able to gather a lot of data and use that as the primary basis for building new content from scratch to populate the new Alta platform. The content that we built to go in this new platform came from a variety of different places. Like Sharon mentioned, we partner very closely with OpenStax, which is really fantastic for us. We're able to offer a low-cost option for students, but because of this partnership with OpenStax, we're actually able to also influence how they're developing content within their company as well. So it really has been a very fruitful partnership from both sides. Besides those instructional pieces that come from OpenStax, we also partner with a bunch of different universities and a lot of professors from all over the country looking across the board in all of our math disciplines. These instructors and universities provide us with reviews, provide us with guidance as to what we should be developing and how we should be developing it. They make other content for us, sometimes in the form of individual questions, more frequently probably in the form of assets like videos. All of our learning objectives have at least 1 or 2 videos associated with them. And like I said, we have partnerships all over the country so that we know that we're getting high quality content in our materials that is also very specific to individual learning objectives, but is presented in the way that you, an instructor, would teach your students. We also have a content team here at Knewton that's made up of people like me that came from academia and have a perspective on how students learn and what kinds of things are effective in the classroom and know where students struggle and where they can use different or more content. So all of these different pieces combined together, as well as looking at experiences from students and instructors on a daily basis, really help us to build and evolve the content and the platform that we have in Alta. So when we talk about adaptivity in Knewton, we talk about it a little bit differently than some of the other educational companies that you may have interacted with. I think adaptive learning is a little bit of a catchphrase and has been for a few years in the education technology industry. And in some cases, like where I worked previously, that term adaptive refers to something very different than the way we use it here. At other companies, they may give a pretest at the beginning of a semester or every few weeks to determine where a student is in their learning path, and then base several weeks or even an entire semester worth of recommendations on that pretest. That's fine, it's a data point, but as an educator, I don't necessarily care today at the end of November what my student knew in August when they took a pretest, or even what they knew before Thanksgiving, the last time they had an update to their checks. What I care about is what they know today, this afternoon at 4:45 p.m., right? I want to make sure that I'm meeting the student where they are as a learner today on their pathway. So when we talk about adaptivity at Knewton, we're talking about very much an on-the-fly adaptivity. Every decision a student makes, everything they get right, every mistake that they make, every time they interact with a piece of instructional content, all of those interactions are dictating where they should go next, what kind of remediation they need, what kind of instruction they should get, what type of a question, whether it's another interactive graphing question or something different as their next question. So ours very much is an up to the date, right this very minute, what is going to be most impactful for a student in their learning course. And I think it's important to understand that definition of adaptivity versus the way some of our colleagues at other places talk about adaptivity when we're thinking about how the system works. And one of the really cool things about the way our whole knowledge graph is built in Knewton is that we're able to really cross disciplines. So I mentioned that I'm a chemist. A lot of general chemistry has a lot of applications in math. I love that I'm able to remediate students not only in chemistry, but also with math prerequisites there. Probably more pertinent for calculus is the fact that we can remediate not just within Chapter 7 of calculus, if that's what you're teaching, not just within the calculus course in general, but we can remediate to additional math classes. Maybe they're struggling on a calculus assignment because there was an algebra assignment that they never really understood, or they just need to refresh on. So because of the way our content is built, the way that our engine is built, we're able to remediate between classes. And again, that's in a just-in-time type of a manner. We offer Alta through all of our math curriculum, all the way from pre-algebra up through Calculus 3. So you can have a seamless transition from course to course, regardless of where the student is in your curriculum. We offer a lot of these courses as co-requisites as well. You can imagine that's going to be more needed in some of these courses. You know, I think college algebra has a big prerequisite, or excuse me, a big co-requisite following these days. So we didn't list them on this slide, but there is a big co-req component to this as well. So our goal here is to meet those students' need across the curriculum, but also within a course, make sure that they're being remediated exactly where they need additional content help. So to give you an idea of the way this adaptive system works, I'm going to share my screen and show you a quick demonstration. It's actually an algebra-based learning objective, but I wanted to show you a few of the tools that we have available, but also give you an idea of how this remediation works. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you can see that, or John will yell at me if you cannot. But the learning objective that I'm looking for here is asking me to solve a system of linear inequalities by graphing them. Our graphing tool that we use in Alta is Desmos. I would imagine that most of you have a lot of experience with that, but it's a very interactive type of a graphing system that allows students to do a variety of different question types, but also very easily make sure that their answer is both readable and gradable as well. So in this particular case, I won't do this entire problem, but you can see how easy it is to manipulate the graph. I can just drag and drop my points here. I can look at my inequality, figure out if I want my shading on one side of that. Oops, here we go. Or if the shading for that inequality should be on the other side, if I should have a solid or a dotted line here, whatever the case may be. I'm able to very easily manipulate my graph to get the line correct, but also that shading component of it correct as well. I can submit my answer if I choose to, if I think this is right. Obviously, it's not. I can go ahead from here and view the answer directly, or for these interactive graphing questions, I actually am allowed a second chance here. So I can try it again and submit the same answer or a different one if I want to. I got this question wrong. Whether I get it wrong or right, Alta actually offers me a very detailed explanation. The reason being, we don't want students to fall into that trap of thinking that their goal is just to get this single question correct. We want them to get questions correct, but in a traditional homework system, if a student got this first question correct, it would give them points, they would move on and deem themselves ready to take a quiz or an exam. We know as educators, though, that getting a single question correct doesn't qualify the student to consider themselves proficient in that topic. So again, whether the question is right or wrong, we want to walk the student through exactly how to solve that in a stepwise manner. And again, whether they get that question right or wrong, they're going to have to solve more problems before we consider them finished or proficient in this particular learning objective. So I got that first one incorrect. I'm surfaced with another question. You'll notice that this isn't directly a derivative of that first question. It's certainly related. It certainly still fits the same learning objective, but some of our signs have changed. Our greater than and less than signs have changed. I think in that last question, we had at least one of these was or equal to. I don't remember if it was greater than or less than, but we change a lot of those different variables from question to question. Again, because we don't want students just retrofitting an answer. We want them to really understand the learning objective and be able to apply that in a lot of different ways. At any time, student can attempt to answer this question, or they can self-select to get more instruction. I know my students typically would try to solve problems before they went back and read instruction, but they always have the option if they want to read first, if they want to do some problems first and then read, we give them that flexibility. What will happen though is I continue to get questions wrong, is that Knewton is going to keep explaining things to me, obviously changing that answer explanation to reflect exactly what this iteration of the question is asking. But it's collecting information about what parts of this I know, what parts of this I don't know, where I'm going to need additional help. And if I continue to get questions wrong, it's going to, I hope my computer didn't lock up, it's going to keep giving me recommendations. And at this point, the system is saying you've gotten a few questions wrong in a row. Why don't you take a break from solving questions and let us help you to understand this content? So we offer instruction, and notice that that appeared adaptively. I got 3 questions wrong. Alta said, hold on, stop trying to beat your head against the wall. Watch this video, or sometimes it'll be that OpenStax page of instruction. All of our videos, I won't play this one. I'll just stop it after a second here. But they're all closed caption.
Welcome to Systems.
Oops, there we go. You can skip around in here if you want to. We have transcripts so that if a student prefers to read instead of watching that video, they're able to do that. They can save it to watch it later, whatever they want to do here. So again, adaptively, Alta determined that I need some instruction instead of just solving problems and reading answer explanations. In this case, it showed me a video. Regardless of whether it's a video or that OpenStax page, we always follow up instruction with a piece of assessment content, a question that's closely related to that video. We want to make sure that the students understand what it is that they read or saw. So, you know, we know that students don't always look at that instruction that we provide them. We want to give them that opportunity either way, but especially for those students who have spent time here, we want to make sure that they understood what they read, so we give them another question. I'm just going to keep getting things wrong so I can show you how the system progresses from there. And there we go. In this case, the instruction, we had that piece of instruction. We had, I clicked through that a little bit too fast. We had a piece of instruction, we had a question, and then we had another piece of instruction that follows that. So sometimes it's just a single video. In that particular case, I got a series of 2 videos that I can sit through and watch. After that, again, the system's going to keep determining whether I've gained some information. Hopefully the students are starting to get things right at this point, but also recognizes that there are certainly times when, even though we've provided them with good instruction, this might not be actually the core of the student's problems, right? There could be times when I'm not able to solve this system of inequalities because I actually struggle with a prerequisite piece of material. So if you'll notice now, my learning objective up here in the corner has changed. I'm not looking at a system of inequalities anymore. Knewton suspects that I may be having trouble just graphing inequalities in general. So it's going to take me to a prerequisite topic where I can just focus on solving one topic at a time, or one inequality at a time. Again, the graph in Knewton is going to work the same way. It's still that Desmos graph. I'm still going to get instruction if I want it, adaptive instruction if I think I don't need it, but Knewton knows I do. And it's still going to have those really great answer explanations. And I won't go into too much further detail. I think you can kind of envision how this is working. But we have this set up so that if a student is still struggling here, we can give them another prerequisite to this problem as well. You know, maybe it's not that they're unable to graph this, maybe it's even more fundamental and they don't know what this inequality means. So we typically remediate up to 2 topics back. We don't want to spend too much time taking them through the whole course again, but we usually give 2, in some cases 3 topics back, and then they can really build up their knowledge base. And I think this is something that's really, really unique to Alta, is that the students don't even always know that they're being remediated. It just happens seamlessly, and unless they're really paying attention to this learning objective up in the corner, this is just something else that they're going to solve. And again, they get the associated instruction and explanations around it. So they don't necessarily feel like they need to be remediated, but rather they see that constructive progress through the learning objective itself. And eventually then, in this way, they're going to be able to build up that skill set that they need to solve the target learning objective, and they're going to become proficient in that learning objective. So really quick overview, if you're interested in a deeper dive, we can certainly set up a separate call or give you a playground course so that you can experiment with a more real or a longer student experience as well. I'd like to show you how we determine some of the efficacy of the system, and I'll show you some reports that we were able, or some studies that we were able to do. John, if you want to grab control again and show the PowerPoint. Like you hopefully saw, we have some really great tools and some really great content in Alta. My team, our content development team, is always pushing the envelope on that and developing new problem types and looking at student experience to see where we need more explanations or additional pieces of instruction or more questions, whatever the case may be. One of the really wonderful things about Knewton is that we also have a data science team right here in-house. And those data scientists not only provide our content development team with data so that we can make revisions based on true student user experience, but they also partner with a lot of different universities, departments, individual instructors to help make sure that Alta is doing exactly what those instructors need it to do in the classroom. And I'm going to show you the results of some of those types of studies that we've done here at Knewton, like I said, to prove or to get us closer to understanding the true efficacy of the product. So the first data point that we really looked at in this process, John, if you want to go to the next slide, was to look at the number of students overall that are completing Alta assignments. And we saw that 87% of the time, students who start an assignment are able to finish it. And that's fantastic. But remember that Alta is a mastery-based system. It's not punitive. If a student gets a question wrong, that's okay. Their grade's not going to go down. And ideally, if they spend long enough in the system, they should all get 100%. It's proficiency-based. So that's a great statistic, but we want to make sure that it's not just telling us that students are able or willing to stick it out until they get their points. So we subdivided this group based on where those students were coming into the class. We sorted them into really 3 categories. High achieving students or above average students, really the top 25% of the class, those that are most likely to go on and succeed, the middle 50%, the average students, and then particularly interesting are these struggling students, the bottom 25% of the class. Those students based on demographics or initial assignments that they take, or even initial questions on an individual assignment. Those students that are least likely to complete the class or to pass the class. Maybe they haven't taken math courses, prerequisites in a number of years and have forgotten a lot of content. Maybe this is their first college math course and they don't have the right study habits yet. Whatever the case may be, we looked at those students who are most at risk, most likely not to make it out of this first math class that they're taking. And what we saw is that among that demographic, 82% of students who started an assignment were able to achieve that mastery mark. So instead of those weaker students, those at-risk students getting frustrated and giving up, we saw them able to achieve mastery, able to finish assignments. And in some math courses, this is really the first time that they've gone through an entire assignment and been able to successfully complete it. we saw this as a really positive sign. Struggling students are sticking through it and making achievements. But again, this is a mastery-based system, and ideally every student should be able to get 100% on these assignments if they go through all of the pathways and all of the remediation and build up their skill sets. So we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just that they could get 100% and they were willing to stick it out. So what we did is look at differences in quiz scores between students who achieved mastery and students who did not. And what we saw overall for students who did not achieve mastery, they were getting an average of 55% on their quizzes for associated content. Those who did achieve mastery were all the way up to 81%. So a significant gap here. But again, as an educator, I think the first thing all of you are probably thinking is that may be related to motivation. Students who aren't willing to put in the time to reach that mastery, that 100% on the assignment, maybe you weren't putting in the time to prepare for the quiz either. So again, we wanted to break this down a little bit more and see if ALTA had a role and what role that might have been in helping students to improve their quiz scores. So we broke up that pool of students again into 3 categories. The top line segment here are the above average students, those who are expected to succeed, and you can see even if they didn't do their Knewton assignment, they were already scoring about 70%, even without studying. The middle line here, this green line, are the average students, and the purple line on the bottom are those struggling students, those that traditionally are probably going to be at risk of not passing. And we saw improvements in quiz scores for all 3 of these sets of students, but you can see that the slope of these lines are quite different depending on their starting point, with the biggest gains related to those at-risk students. We saw that when those at-risk students put in the time, they were much more successful at not only completing but doing well on their quizzes after those ALTA assignments, to the point where they're caught up for the most part with those average students. So it really has made a difference there. But again, as scientists, we wanted to dig into this a little bit more and make sure that these gains weren't just because they were spending more time doing their homework or because they have felt confident to do some studying outside of the class. Those are great things, but we wanted to see if ALTA had a greater impact than that, and again, certainly adjust our system as needed according to the results. So the next study our data scientists did was to look at a longer term efficacy throughout a course. So instead of just going from an assignment a couple of days later to take a quiz, we looked at how students performed across the semester. And we looked at how much time they spent on an assignment, particularly related to remediation, early in the semester versus how much remediation or how much time on an assignment they needed later in the semester. And again, what we found is that across the board, students spent less time in assignments as the course went on and as content got more difficult, with the biggest time savings for those struggling students. And what this told us was that even if a student entered a semester with weak prerequisite skills or weak study skills, had to spend a lot of time getting through those initial assignments early in the semester, they were able to build up that prereq knowledge. They weren't being remediated to those same pre-algebra, college algebra types of topics, or I should say pre-calculus and college algebra types of topics as the course went on. So they weren't repeatedly remediated to a previous course or the same topics. And topics that they learned early in the semester, they didn't need as much remediation late in the semester. So maybe chapter 3 had a lot of new content for them, a lot of new concepts for them, but based on their time in ALTA, they were actually retaining that information and being able to successfully apply it later on in the course without a lot of extra remediation associated with it. We saw this, again, as a particularly positive thing for students. They were not only performing better on quizzes, but they were retaining that information and applying it to more complex situations later in the semester. So I think you kind of get the idea here that our data scientists do a lot of different kinds of studies, both at the individual classroom level and at the course level across the country, so that we can learn how our students are interacting with the systems, but also make both content and platform types of improvements as we need to. One of the things that we really love to do is encourage instructors to work with our data scientists to figure out what your particular goals are for using Alta and help us to determine if you're meeting those goals, or to give you advice for changing the experiment the next time you teach the class. So I think Sharon's going to share with us some of the ways that she uses data and maybe give us an idea of how she uses Alta in her class as well. But absolutely, we encourage you to get in touch with our data scientist, or let us put you in touch with them so that you can learn a little bit more about what's available.
Sounds good. So how I use Alta and OpenStax. Well, let me start with the pre-semester reach out. I contact all of my students before the semester begins and tell them the great news that their book is going to be free. They'll have a free PDF of their text available, and that they're going to be using this courseware that only costs $44. So I'll share my course code with them at that time. And that's been cool. I've been able to watch then that students will go ahead and get signed up in their Alta class and start working on some of that beginning chapter 1 content really before the semester even begins. One thing that has been really great is that this semester, for example, 100% of my students were able to purchase the Alta platform, which was amazing. Again, coming from, having just a few students in class actually purchasing the courseware or the text to 100% purchasing, that's been amazing. Another thing that I did, I didn't create a bullet point here, but I'll mention for calculus, I did create a diagnostic exam for my students so they could get started, like I said, reviewing that prereq content. And what I did then is opened a review center for students so they could start reviewing for that diagnostic exam. In terms of my grading for the class, I have a pretty traditional course in that my students are taking in-class assessments, pencil and paper exams. There are 4 exams given. We do have in-class quizzes, and then what I call in-class labs. So I prefer to spend class time working on application problems and conceptual ideas. So I use Alta as kind of a flipped instruction in that my students should be going through, let's say in terms of integration, some simpler problems. Then they'll have a certain level of, kind of prerequisite, let's say mastery. Then in class, I can spend time more on the important conceptual ideas as well as application work. So those labs, they'll work on in groups. And that's another component of my grading system. So the homework on Alta will count overall 22% of their total grade. And then, of course, the final exam. We're getting ready for that as well now. So let's take a look at some of the other pieces I have here. So this is how I add an assignment. Today I started with the DISC method to approximate volumes in calculus. And you can see that when I choose that learning objective, and again, I'm part of a 4-campus system, so it's really important that I hit all of those required student learning outcomes in my class. I can then take and turn on some of the specific learning objectives off and on related to this overall idea of using the DISC method. Here, for example, these are all topics that I teach in class. Now, when I'm choosing these learning objectives, I can either preview as a student or I can, definitely just click into the learning objective to see all of the different types of homework problems. So before I would choose something, of course, I would look at what the assessment piece might be, but also I can look at the instructional piece for the students. So that's been really cool, and I can see what videos, for example, would be attached to that little slice of the, in most cases, OpenStax text that the students will see as the instructional piece. And then on the next slide, here are some of the analytics that I get to see about my class. First of all, I can tell who's active, who's inactive, and I'll say something to them in class. I'll be like, what? I've got 8 inactive students. And you can see those 8 students, kind of drop their heads down. And I'm like, hey, no reason to look down. I know exactly who you are. Come on, let's get back on task. I can also see who is getting close to achieving mastery at that point in the class and who is struggling. So if I know who is struggling, then I can, send an email to those students saying, hey, I've got office hours tomorrow. Let's stop by, let's see what's going on here. And so really these analytics, again, can inform my student interactions. And then, Knewton will send me a midterm report on, really so I can monitor, how students are doing with this work, how much time they're spending on different assignments. So as a mathematician and a statistician, I love all of these analytics. There's a lot of things I can look through to try to, determine how I can best use my class time. And then, I'll get these emails about daily about who's struggling and with what. So, for example, back in our calculus class, when a student begins to struggle, I'll get an email about it. I can click in and see what student that is. And again, I can then send an email to that student asking them to stop by, or I can make sure to spend some one-on-one time with that student in class. And then, I look quite a bit at, again, how much work my students are doing, whether they're getting close to mastery. In terms of testing, I do also create practice tests in Alta. So before they come and take their pencil and paper test, my students will be taking a practice test within Alta. And again, I had mentioned that I can open a review center for those students so they can go through and review those specific student learning outcomes. I do occasionally, if it looks like students aren't as engaged as they should be, I'll put a quiz then as well in Alta to encourage them. Okay, yeah, you've got to get back in there to take this quiz, and while you're at it, let's get working on your homework again. And then I think just the support, the content people have been really helpful to me in my work. I've done a lot of work with co-requisites and working with the team to make sure that we have all of that content in the course that we need to support our students. And so they have been extremely helpful with all of that. And do I have anything else to show here? That's it.
Yep. Okay, so we have a minute left. And thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Andrea. If anyone has questions, please type them into the question bar, and we'll answer them in the remaining time. So if you have any questions at all, please go ahead and type them in. We'll wait to see. Okay, so we are at time now. So anyway, thank you for coming. So we will be sending you an email. I'll be sending you an email tomorrow with a link to a recording of this webinar. And if you have any questions come up after we end right now, please feel free to just hit reply with any questions you have, or if you'd like a sandbox course or a more in-detail demo, don't be shy. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Andrea, for facilitating today.
Thank you all.
Yep, thanks everyone. I appreciate your time. Have a great afternoon.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.